(21:9), and the Haftarah is going to be Isaiah 51:12, 52, to all the way to 52:12. All right, you want me to go back?
Which one? 1621?
It's already on the Google Classroom, so if you guys want to see it afterwards or whatever.
I don't have a phone that goes here.
Okay.
I got I was going through something with my mind.
Yeah, that's fine, man. Don't worry about it.
I'm on a lot of medication.
All right. Everybody has it down. Okay. So before anything, we're going to do the blessing for the Torah. So Baruch atah Adonai Barak. Baruch Adonai Barak le'olam vayed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher b'akavanu mikol ha'anim. V'lanu v'torto. Baruch atah Adonai noten Torah. Bless Adonai who is blessed. Blessed Adonai who is blessed now and forever. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who has chosen us from among the people and given us the Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, who gives the Torah. So I wanted to do a little recap about where we are in Deuteronomy. So we talked about how before there is a basic pattern of ancient Near Eastern treaties, and they had 6 elements to this.
And it's written, when they're out treaties, it's written in Arcanian. And throughout Judges, they are punished over and over, and they talked about marriage in it. They talked about sexual immorality. They talked about different parts of Israel that were encamped by the Moabites, the Perizzites, and the Jebusites. All these tribes, and they were going to war together. So there were judges, but the judges, they also fell into marriage, or they worshiped other gods. So God had to punish the Israelites for being with or obeying the other people of the land. They weren't really strong to what they are, because we're not perfect and we have to learn. And God is always there to teach us a lesson.
Yes.
Even if we have too much technology.
But that's going to be, I think that's the book of Judges, though, that you're talking about, right?
Yeah, the book of Judges.
This was the portion of Judges, which is still in Deuteronomy, though. So you're kind of like forward above everybody else. So yeah, you're good, man. But you're ahead of us, yeah. So there's going to be 6 basic elements to the Ancient Near Eastern Treaty. And if you guys remember it, or if you don't, there was the preamble, the historical prologue, the stipulations, the document, the witness of the gods, curses and blessings. I'm not going to cover all of this again. I'm just trying to recap it. So this portion is going to cover stipulations. Like I don't know if you guys remember, but I talked about how Deuteronomy, all the way from chapter 1 to the end, is set up in a way so that it's a treaty between God and the people. So right now, for this portion, it's going to cover the stipulations part of Deuteronomy. So it's going to expand on the stipulations given in Deuteronomy 5 to 11:32. And in this portion, there's going to be 41 laws, 14 performative, and 27 prohibitive. I'm not going to cover every single law because I don't want to blow your mind with knowledge. But I'm going to cover some of them that are interesting. So my sources for this teaching is going to be the Taryag Mitzvot. That's the one that gives you all the 630 commandments. It expands upon it. It explains it. It's a pretty good book. And the other one is the Zondervan Illustrated Bible Backgrounds Commentary. And, one second. That one is going to be good to have as a background for the Ancient Near Eastern stuff.
You think I can write my own book?
Anybody can, technically.
Does that help people? Because does what I say help people somewhat? Because sometimes I feel
we have to stick on topic because it's a Torah portion. It's okay. Afterwards, you can talk about it. So let's cover the very first mitzvah, which is, for people that don't know, mitzvah is a commandment. So the first commandment in this portion is judges and officers you shall appoint for yourselves in all of your gates. And that's from Deuteronomy 16 to 18. I'm sorry, 16:18. You got that down? Yeah. So I don't know, a lot of people don't know this, but Israel actually had a court system. And their court system consisted of 3 different levels. Kind of like how we have our Supreme Court, but then we have other lower courts, right? You guys know about those courts?
That will mean judicial, legislative, and executive.
Well, those are 3 branches of government. But I'm talking about the judicial branch. I want to be there. Yeah, it's fun. So Israel had the Great Sanhedrin, which was the upper court. The Sanhedrin Gedolah.
And there were 70 elders.
71 judges.
71 judges.
Yeah. So then they had the Sanhedrin Ketanah, which is the lower major court. And then they had the Beit Din, which would be your local court. So like I said, it's just like our own system. We have our Supreme Court that deals with like the big picture stuff. They check if an amendment is constitutional or not, or they deal with cases that go up to that level. And then we have our district court. This is our district court here in Florida in the area. They deal with more like prosecution of criminal cases. If you want to fight a traffic ticket, you'd have to go to the district court. And then you have your local court, and they deal with the very, very small stuff. So it's just the same system. Each court deals with certain specific stuff. And if a case gets big enough, it goes all the way to Supreme Court. Like, I don't know if you guys saw on the news, there was somebody that he worked at the post office. He wanted to keep the Sabbath. His Sabbath was Sunday, but he wanted to keep it. So his job told him no. He went to the courts. They started going up on the levels. One of the levels told him that he had to work, which is scary for us because if that's the case, then they could make us work on the Sabbath. But then it went to the Supreme Court, which is the highest court in all of the United States, and they said, no, it's not constitutional to make him work on the Sabbath. So so it's good for us because then they would have made us work on the Sabbath if they got away with it. But that's just how the Israel system works. Everybody has their own certain stuff that they focus on. If it gets big enough, then it goes all the way to the grace and hatred. And we'll see examples of that.
What were the three again?
Well, I'm going to actually cover them in depth, but I don't know if you want me to go over this so you can write it down. Okay. So the very first one, which is the top one, is the Sanhedrin Gedollah, which is the Great Sanhedrin. So they're going to be like our version of the Supreme Court.
Why do they call it the Great Sanhedrin?
Because there's the other Sanhedrins, like the lower courts. I'm going to explain it, though, so you can understand. So the Great Sanhedrin is going to have the 71 judges that we talked about. I was talking about it with Tito. I don't remember the exact number, but it was about a portion of the judges were civilians, a portion were priests, and then it was supposed to be the 71st person was supposed to be the high priest. But then after a while in the Second Temple period, they started buying the position for priesthood. So they would pay Rome or whoever to get a position in the priesthood. So then they had to find another position, which is called the Nasim, which is the president. So they made that position, and now a person that they elected could be that 71st person. And they would use that person to break a vote. So if they did a vote and it got tied, that 71st person, the president, would break that tie. That's usually the only time they would use him, but he had a voice in the court. So a judge had to meet the following qualifications. He had to possess wisdom, and when we're talking about wisdom in the sense of the Bible, it's talking about the wisdom of the Torah. So he had to know the Torah, the law, which makes sense for a judge. If a judge doesn't know the law, then I don't think he should be a judge, right? He had to have modesty, fear of Hashem, a dislike for monetary gain, so he couldn't be bought out. He would ignore all that. He had a love of truth, well respected by the community, and a good reputation. And the last part I think is interesting, a good reputation, because he couldn't just be anybody. Everybody had to know him and understand that, he was a stand-up guy. And the Great Sanhedrin is going to deal with national issues. They would deal with appointments of a king, or if one of the tribes got involved with idolatry, they would have to figure out what they're going to do about that. Big picture stuff. They're not going to worry about if two people are having an argument in this small town. That's not what they have to focus. They focus on big stuff. So they're going to be located in the temple in the Second Temple period, in the Lishkas Hagois, which is the chamber of hewn stone. And using the Second Temple app that Rico and Joseph Good and I forgot what's the third one? Historical. Got the company. I'm sorry if they ever watch this video, but so this is from the Second Temple app, and this is a layout of the Second Temple. So the chamber of hewn stone is going to be in the southeastern corner right there. And when you go inside of it, that's where they would meet up, and that's where all the judges would discuss cases and stuff like that. And we see an example of that in Acts 5 with the apostles. So in Acts 5, 12 to 39, it says, the apostles performed many signs and wonders among the people. Nevertheless, more and more men and women believed in the Lord and were added to their number. As a result, people brought the sick into the streets and laid them on beds and mats so that at least Peter's shadow might fall on them as he passed by. Crowds gathered also from towns around Jerusalem.
Oh, this is like during Jesus' time.
This is after Yeshua. He already died.
Oh, wasn't he alive because he came back from the dead?
Yeah, but you know what I mean? Like, he wasn't on the world at that time. He was...
He
already resurrected. He already ascended, yeah. So right now...
more of himself. A better version of himself.
But let's focus on this. And so now they're in Jerusalem, bringing their sick and those tormented by impure spirits, and all of them were healed. Then the high priest and all his associates, who were members of the party of the Sadducees, were filled with jealousy. And they arrested the apostles and put them in public jail. But during the night, an angel of the Lord opened the doors of the jail and brought them out and said, "Go stand in the temple courts," he said, "and tell them all the people about his life." About this new life, I'm sorry. The apostles were brought in and made to appear before the Sanhedrin to be questioned by the high priest. We gave you strict orders not to teach in this name. He said, "Yet you have filled Jerusalem with your teaching and are determined to make us guilty of this man's blood." So if you have a high priest and they're in Jerusalem and they got held in a temple court, which court system are they dealing with if they're getting trial?
The judicial system?
The Great Sanhedrin.
Oh, I don't know.
So they're dealing with the very big upper level court. So they have a big case on their hands right now. So this isn't just any small little thing. This is a major case for the Great Sanhedrin. They want to figure out what they're going to do with these apostles, because some of them, the Sadducees, want to kill them because they're making them look bad. But they have to figure out legally what they're going to do first. So then Peter and the other apostles reply, we must obey God rather than human beings. The God of our ancestors raised Yeshua from the dead, whom you killed by hanging him on a cross. God exalted him to his own right hand as Prince and Savior that he might bring Israel to repentance and forgive their sins. We are witnesses of these things, and so is the Holy Spirit, whom God has given to those who obey him. When they heard this, they were furious and wanted to put them to death. But a Pharisee named Gamaliel, who was a pretty serious name back then in that time, he was actually the Nasi during that time in the Great Sanhedrin. And if you remember, the Nasi was the president that would make the major vote in the Sanhedrin. So Gamaliel, the teacher of the law, who was honored by all the people, stood up in the Sanhedrin and ordered that the men be put outside for a little while. Then he addressed the Sanhedrin. Men of Israel, consider carefully what you intend to do to these men. Some time ago, Theudius appeared, claiming to be somebody, and about 400 men rallied to him. He was killed, and all his followers were dispersed. And it all came to be nothing. After him, Judas the Galilean appeared in the days of the census and led a band of people in a revolt. He too was killed, and all his followers were scattered. Therefore, in this present case, I advise you, leave these men alone. Let them go, for if their purpose or activity is of human origin, it will fail. But if it is from God, you will not be able to stop these men. You will only find yourself fighting against God. So then they agreed to leave them alone. And since this is a great Sanhedrin, everybody has to respect the decision they made. So now they can't put them to death because they came to the conclusion, if it's from them, then eventually it'll die off. But if it's from God, then you're going to have problems. But that shows you, if you understand how the legal system works, then you know how big of a deal this was. It wasn't just like a small little thing that happened in the temple. This was a thing that was respected by all the Israelites. So then we have the Great Sanhedrin, and then we're also going to have the Lesser Sanhedrin, the Sanhedrin Kantanah. This one is going to consist of 23 judges. Usually these Sanhedrins were found in towns with more than 120 people, and they would deal with the following. They will deal with death sentences for people or animals. A lot of people get weirded out about the animal part, but like, let's say today in modern society, if I have a dog, and the dog, it keeps getting out and biting people and injuring children, and it happens over and over again. Eventually, the government gets involved, the state, and they're like, look, if you can't handle your dog, and clearly your dog is violent, we have to put your animal down. So that's basically what it means by that.
It's basically like baseball. No strikes and you're down, like 3 strikes and you're down. This is more strikes.
Yeah, and more serious. Yeah. And then there's monetary fines for personal injury and robbery. That's what they're going to deal with. And then with towns with less than 120 people, they had a Beis Din. And the Beis Din is going to consist of 3 judges. And they only dealt with monetary matters. So the Beis Din is not allowed to make any judicial, what's the word? Decisions. So if somebody committed a crime, they can't be like, well, he's going to be trial for murder. That's not up to them. They would have to send that person to the Lesser Sanhedrin. And if the case gets bigger enough, then they can take it to the Great Sanhedrin. But everybody had their own role to do, and nobody could supersede it. So it's just like our judicial system. So you can see that Israel was very organized. It wasn't just a random religious thing where the judge, he felt something in his heart and he made a decision. No, it was organized and they came to a conclusion. So if we go back to the Mitzvah 491, it says, judges and officers you shall appoint for yourselves in all of your gates. Why does it make it such a big emphasis in all of the gates? What does that mean? So if we go back a lot of portions ago, the two angels that encounter Lot, it reads in Genesis 19:1, it says, the two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet him and bowed himself with his face to the earth and said, my lords, please turn aside to your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may rise up and go early and go up on your way. So then the question is again, why does the Bible have to mention he was sitting at the gate? Is it just an extra detail so that way you can picture in your head what's going on? Or is there a purpose to it? So if you study the ancient Near East, you actually learn that there's an importance to the gates of the cities. So right here, this is from Israel. It's a seat of judgment that's located at one of the gates from the older cities. So in the ancient Near East, judges, kings, or reporters of affairs would sit on platforms like this by the gate of the city. This would mean that Lot would have been someone important in that time. So if you read this commentary from the Zondervan, oh yes.
Yes. It actually looks kind of elegant.
I don't know if it was comfortable. I hope he had a pillow, but yeah, that's where they would sit. And this commentary from the Zondervan gives you more insight. It says, the Ugari processed justice and carried out judgment at the city gate. Problems and issues of the towns were discussed, and justice meted out at the city gates. The central public gate was a place of assembly, business, and legal transaction. So the gates of a city was a very important place to be at. That's where they would do cases with judges, or they would do trades and stuff like that. It's very opposite to the way we work, because if you go outside the city by the entrance of the town, there's nothing going on there. There's a welcome sign, and that's about it. And then when you get to the center of the town, that's where you find the judges and all that stuff. But over there, it was different. So that's why you can't think in a Western mindset, because then it's never going to make sense. When you study the ancient Near East, things start to make more sense. So to recap the Mitzvot 491, how many levels of courts were there in Israel?
123?
No, how many levels?
3?
3.
I knew it.
So can you name the courts? What was the first one? Yeah, the Great Sanhedrin, right? And then the next one after that?
I'm going to study my Bible.
Yeah, what's the next one after the Great Sanhedrin? What? Well then, Bianca, what's the one after the Great Sanhedrin?
I can only remember Judge Judy on the screen. I'm sorry.
That's fine. And then Neto, do you know what's after the Great Sanhedrin?
The greater.
Well, the Lesser Sanhedrin, right? Okay, the Lesser Sanhedrin. Yeah, so there's the Great Sanhedrin, the Less Sanhedrin, and then the Beis Din is the low-level base court. Beis Din. It's Beisdin. So then how many judges were in the Sanhedrin Gadollah? 71, right? And then what did they handle? What did they deal with?
They handle murder cases.
No. Bigger. Think bigger.
Idolatry.
Yeah, things that affect the whole nation. Big picture stuff.
But is it murder really bad?
Murder is bad, but that's a lower level court. The Sanhedrin has to focus at big stuff.
Or the complicated stuff.
Well, let's say if the king murders somebody innocent, then that would be big level stuff. You see what I mean? So where were they located in the Simple Temple period? What? The chamber of the hewn stone, right? And then how many judges were in the Sanhedrin Ketanah? 23, right? What did they handle? What did they deal with? Sorry? Death penalties, monetary stuff. They dealt with lower level stuff. And where were they located? Well, they're going to be at the gates of the city, but only certain towns can have Sanhedrin Ketanah. Cities with 120 or more, they would have the Sanhedrin Ketanah. And then how many judges made up the Beis Din? 3, right? And then what could they do or not do? What were they allowed to do?
Only to be of a monetary matter.
Yeah, only monetary matters. So they can't, I don't know how to explain it exactly.
Taxes and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, I don't know if it was exactly like that. I don't know what they had monetary-wise to deal with. But something like that, for example, yeah, let's go with that. But they can't put somebody to death or punish somebody. That's not up to them. They'd have to go to the next one over. And then where would they be located? What towns would usually have a base in?
See, again,
Smaller towns with less than
like
120.
pueblos,
Sure, but if they had less than
suburbs.
120 people towns, they would be. That's where the base ins are. So why were city gates important in the ancient Near East? What would they do at the city gates? Hey, if you guys remember, there's an echo. So if you guys start talking, it picks up. Yeah. So the next mitzvah is 492. You shall not plant yourself a grove and any tree near the altar of Hashem, your God. Now, a lot of times when I used to read this, I thought it was unnecessary. Like, what's the big deal about a tree? But if you look at the translation, it says the Asherah. And so that's deal with idolatry. And if you go to Deuteronomy 7:5, it says, this is what you are to do to them. Break down their altars, smash their sacred stones, cut down their Asherah poles, and burn their idols in the fire. So then you have to ask, what is an Asherah pole? So there's a commentary from the Zondervan that gives you a background. And it says that there used to be standing stones, altars, and symbols of Asherah were part of the furnishings of the cults and rituals in Canaan. From 1200 to 1600 BC, the Asherahs represented the female aspect of the deity.
The female?
So those trees that they planted had to do with fertility. So yeah, they were connected to pagan stuff.
Because it gives birth to life.
Yeah, and they found that it wasn't just like physical poles that they would erect. They would put trees. They would plant trees. And if you look at the cultures from the nations back then, they would have a lot of things with sacred trees. So, for example, there's a picture here from the Assyrians. They're taking care of this sacred tree. And then there's, it kind of does look like a Christmas tree. It's kind of weird, right?
Interesting.
And then there's this.
That's deep right there.
Yeah, but this tree, it wasn't there by accident. They planted it there because that's in Greece, I think in Athens. And for them, the oak tree was sacred. So they would plant oak trees around the temples. So again, that's why God says, don't put any trees around the temples. I don't want them to confuse pagan worship with my stuff. So don't put any trees on the temple, near the temple, on the Temple Mount. There cannot be any trees. So now if I look at the Temple Mount today, besides that golden thing, what else shouldn't be there? So if they want to rebuild the temple, what they're going to have to do? Take them all the trees. So it's not that simple. So they can't just get rid of the mosque in the middle and try to fix everything. They have to totally reconstruct everything.
That's going to be hard. Yeah.
So next is the mitzvah 497 and 498. And this one says, you may set a king over you, you may not set over you a stranger. He shall not acquire for himself many horses, neither shall he take to himself many wives. Kanan, I need you to sit in the front.
Mitzvah is like commandments.
So commandment 497, 498. You may set a king over you, you may not set over you a stranger. He shall not acquire for himself many horses, neither shall he take himself many wives. So now, if you read the portion, God tells them that, God is their king. But he knows that in the future that they're going to want a physical king, even though God doesn't want that to be the case. But he says if that's going to happen, then the king has to at least meet my conditions. So the king is appointed by the Great Sanhedrin with the approval of a prophet. And you guys know what a prophet is, technically. It's a messenger, but a royal messenger. So he basically is the representative of God. It's like if God was speaking through him, if you want to put it that way. So with the approval of the Great Sanhedrin, with the approval of the prophet, this king is appointed by the approval of God. Any decrees that he made that didn't conflict the Torah had to be obeyed. Kings must be from the line of David, so they couldn't be from any other tribe. They had to be from the line of David. Anybody else could not be the king.
Wow, that's deep.
And then 498 says you must not set any foreigners. And that's because foreigners do not have loyalty to the native borns. I mean, here in the United States, if somebody wants to be president, they can't be from any other country. They have to be born in the U.S.
In ancient times, the reason you couldn't be around foreigners is because they had different gods, different traditions, and there were certain commandments that went against what they went.
I wouldn't say be around foreigners, but like if a foreigner was an idol worshiper, God wouldn't want you to be affiliated with that person.
Yeah.
But if they wanted to come to Israel and worship God, they could be among the people. If you have a question, I want to talk about that. Yeah, but there's a good example with Egypt. I remember in school they talked about the Hyksos. I don't know if you guys ever heard about that, but the Hyksos were a family of slaves that took over Egypt, and once they took over Egypt, they oppressed the people because they're not Egyptians. They don't care. They just want to look out for their own. So that's why God says, make sure you don't put any foreigner, because once you put a foreigner, he doesn't really care about your people. He just cares about himself and more power and stuff like that. So he's only going to focus on power and control. And we have a good example with Herod the Great. This is the king that during Yeshua's time that wanted to execute Yeshua. And then instead he executed the firstborn in all of Israel. He was the king over Judea when Yeshua was born. And his father was an Edomite, so what's the problem there? He's not from the line of David. So he shouldn't even be king. But he got put there because his dad had connections with the Romans. And he had a history of oppressing the people. He was a really evil guy. Like, nobody liked him, and went on because eventually he eventually dies from an unknown illness. And before he dies, he knows nobody's going to come to his funeral. So he tells his brother and his sister, hey, get all the most important people in Israel to go to my funeral, and then kill them, so people can cry at my funeral. They didn't do it, but he was bad. He was a bad guy. This guy was awful. All right, so now we have Mitzvah 497. Well, it's a statue. Yeah, I would hope he had arms, but maybe that's why he was so mad. So Mitzvah Commandment 499, 501, and 502. He shall not acquire for himself many horses, neither shall he take for himself many wives, nor acquire for himself too much silver and gold. Now, when I read it as a kid, I was confused. Like, why is having too many horses such a big deal? Like, why can't he have like 100 horses? Mm-hmm. Maybe he likes horses, you know what I mean? But then in the Zondervan, it gives you a little bit of insight of how they viewed horses back then in the ancient Near East. So horses were highly valued because they were essential to war. Gods in the ancient Near East were depicted riding horses. And ancient Near Eastern nations took great care of the horses and chariots. So everybody knew that horses were connected to war. And if you had a lot of horses, that meant you were very prominent in war because you had horses to carry your chariots and all that.
That was about technology.
Yeah, actually it is, because that technically counts as technology.
The more technology you have, the more important you are in the world.
Yes, at the time.
That's why the United States is so important.
Yeah, that's why at the time, horses and chariots were the technology of the world. So the more you had that, the more power you had in the world. But God didn't want the king to have more of that, because then it's going to go to his head that he's powerful and that he has his power not from God, that it's him. And then the next mitzvah, 501, the king shall not acquire many wives. In the ancient Near East, kings married wives for political purposes. So if you wanted to do a treaty between two nations, you'd marry the daughter of the king and then so on and so forth. So that way you'd have this bond. Because if you have a bond with family, then you're not going to try to kill the other guy and so on and so forth. You're going to have this bond that you have to respect. But the marriages marriages created bonds between nations and dynasties. I said that. And each foreign wife actually represented a foreign god and a pagan political deity. You had a question?
That's why, like, David and Solomon had, like, such a hard time.
I was going to talk about that, yeah. No, it's fine. Yeah, it's perfect. But yeah, so it should come back. Is that if I touch it a little bit? Yeah.
Is it broken?
I think so.
Get a new computer.
It's not the computer, it's the cable. It's a cord, the cord. Yeah. My computer should be fine. I hope it's fine.
Oh, yes.
Alright. So oh my god.
It's because we pointed it
Okay. So each wife actually represented in herself a pagan god. So she represented the pagan god of that nation. So when Solomon has all his wives, he's technically having like living pagan idols among them. And eventually that affects him. We'll read about them. So we see Solomon ends up doing everything that God said a king should not have. It says the weight of gold that Solomon received yearly was 666 talents, which is an interesting number because, that's not really good. But I did the math. They said a talent is about, they said 666 talents is 20 to 25 tons of gold. And a ton is about, I think this is in metric tons.
That's a lot.
Yeah. Well, we're talking metric tons. I can't give you pounds. But just to give you an idea, we're talking about $1.1 to $1.39 billion he's getting yearly. And Jeff Bezos, you know how much he gets a year? Jeff Bezos, the richest guy in the world, he gets $1.68 million a year. That's his yearly income, millions. So this guy is getting a nice base billion income of gold every year. And then if you keep reading, it says that he made silver so common that it was like the rocks in Israel. So he had a lot of silver, he had a lot of gold. He already broke that one rule. And it says, not including the revenues from merchants and traders from all the Arabian kings and governors of the territories. And on top of that, he sent ships to get stuff for him. Ships from all around to give him nice stuff. And then King Solomon was greater in riches and wisdom than all the other kings of the earth. Solomon accumulated chariots and horses. Again, wasn't supposed to do that. He had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horses, which he kept in the chariot cities and also with him in Jerusalem. And then he ends up getting a bunch of wives. So King Solomon, however, loved many foreign women besides Pharaoh's daughter: Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites. They were from the nations which God told the Israelites, you must not intermarry with them, because they will surely turn your hearts after their gods. Nevertheless, Solomon held fast to them. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines, and his wives led him astray. As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other, please. And his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been. He followed the Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Moloch, the detestable god of the Ammonites. So Solomon did evil in the eyes of the Lord. He did not follow the Lord completely as David his father had done. On the hill east of Jerusalem, Solomon built a high place for Shemoth, the detestable god of Moab, and for Moloch, the detestable god of the Ammonites. And I don't know if you guys know about Moloch, but Moloch was a very bad god. So they would heat up this statue, and the hands would be out like this. And then they would put the live baby on the hands, and the baby would be cooked alive on the statue. So Solomon basically built one of these things on a high hill, and of course God was not happy with it. But that's because he let those women get to them. And he told them, he said, make sure you don't have silver and gold, a bunch of horses, and a bunch of wives, because I know what's going to happen. It's going to corrupt your heart. So then he went from being the most smartest king in all the land and being honorable. He went from that to this. So to recap all the commandments that we covered real quick. So we had
covered idolatry.
No, I did. That was not the mitzvah. The mitzvah 492 says we shall not near the temple? Plant trees, yeah. And Ashtaroths were connected with
fertility.
Yeah, fertility. So mitzvah 497, how was a king appointed?
Through the Sanhedrin.
Yeah, the Great Sanhedrin, and who else had to be there? A prophet, right? And what family line does a king need to come from?
David.
If he comes from anywhere else, does he qualify?
No.
So yeah, he's not legitimate. God doesn't recognize him. He's not the king. So mitzvah 498. Why can't we have a foreign king? What's going to happen?
Because they're going to introduce their God.
They'll introduce their gods, and then they're going to do what? They're going to oppress the people, right?
And their hearts.
Yeah. So then mitzvah 499. Horses were connected to what in the ancient Near East? To war. Yes. Thank you, Andrew. And then mitzvah 501. Why did kings marry foreign wives?
They represented other gods.
Well, they did represent other gods.
Political
But what was the purpose?
For nation.
Nations to connect with each other and have what's the word? I can't think of the word. Interpolitical relations, I guess is the word. And then you answered my next question, what did a foreign wife represent? And you said gods, right? They represented the idols from that nation.
Yeah.
And then what could a king not accumulate?
Horses.
Well, it says specifically silver and gold.
Silver and gold.
Mm-hmm.
Or
Yeah. All right, so we covered, I think,
that was a lot that I knew.
how much
What I
commandments?
studied today was good.
6, right, so far? No, not so far, though. We covered 6 now, but I think it's 7? 7 commandments so far, right? And remember, there's 41 commandments. So, commandment, mitzvah 504 says the Kohanim, the Leviim, and all the tribe of Levi shall have no portion or inheritance with Israel. And then mitzvah, commandment 520 says, you shall set apart 3 cities of refuge for yourself.
Oh, that goes into Deuteronomy and Judges. Because you talked about like the cities of refuge, like if a guy throws his axe and the axe hits the other guy and it kills him on accident, he has to go to another city and they explain his case, and then that guy comes after him, they keep him safe.
Yeah, I'm gonna go.
If he did kill that guy intentionally, then he gets killed.
Yeah.
Executed.
I'm gonna go more into detail about how exactly they would work with that. All right. So we have the 12 tribes of Israel, and if you guys look at the map, there's no Levite tribe in the land. They had no inheritance, but they did have 48 cities that they had to themselves. And those cities are going to be among the tribes, and they're actually going to be divided pretty evenly. I like this map because it shows you, so a lot of people don't actually know this, but the tribes are set up in a way that certain families were in certain areas. So the Kohanim, like Aaron and his sons, they're going to be in Judah and Simeon. And then the descendants of the Merari are going to be on one side, and so on and so forth. Because if you guys remember, the Levites had different families. So each family member were living in certain regions in Israel. And each tribe had about 4 cities, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, because 4 times 12 is 48, yeah.
Yeah, because 4 times 2 is 8, and 4 times 1 is 4. 48.
Thank you. So now the question is, like, how come they can't have an inheritance? Why is God being so tough with them? Why can't they have anything?
Because he wanted to teach them a lesson.
No.
No?
Yeah, it says the Lord's their inheritance. When you compare them with the Egyptian priests, this is a quote I took from online, from World History Encyclopedia. It says, one of the contributing factors to the collapse of the central government at the end of the Old Kingdom was that the king had exempted the priesthood from paying taxes. The priests not only lived off the offerings given to the gods, but were able to profit from the land they owned, whose bounty was out of reach of the royal treasury. There is not a single period in Egyptian history in which this paradigm is not evident. Bianca, I need you to sit there.
Joshua Jake.
That chair right there?
Please. This is ancient Egypt. Why do they call it encyclopedia and not a dictionary?
Encyclopedia is like a book of information and different stuff. A dictionary is a definition of words.
Oh.
Yeah.
Encyclopedia is more based on history, and a dictionary is just about grammar or like certain words that you don't know.
Dictionary is more focused on definition of a words you don't know. And
Or don't have the accurate meaning.
Yeah, we gotta stay on topic. So basically what this information is saying is that back then, these priests, they used to accumulate so much wealth that they had enough power to even, what's the word that they used? Well, they were enough to overcome the king sometimes. And later on in the Egyptians' history, they had to like cut down the wealth of the priests because they were becoming too powerful. So this is why God doesn't want the Levites to have an inheritance, because he wants to make sure that nobody confuses them with the Egyptian priests. And on top of that, it's kind of like a checks and balance type of thing. Because yes, the priests, they do help God and they deal with the temple, but they're not over anybody else. So there's like a balance of everything. So going back to this picture, we have the 48 cities, and they're divided by families. But we also have the cities of refuge, Mitzvot 520. And there's going to be 6 of them. So we got Kedesh, Shechem, and Hebron on the west side, and then Golan, Ramoth, and Bezer on the right side. And we learn about the function of these cities in Joshua 20, 2-9. So it says, speak to the sons of Israel, saying, designate the cities of refuge of which I spoke to you through Moses. that the manslayer who kills any person unintentionally without premeditation may flee there, and they shall become your refuge from the avenger of blood. He shall flee to one of these cities and shall stand at the entrance of the gate of the city.
This is where I would know already.
Yeah, you know what? And state his case in the hearing of the elders of that city. And they shall take him into the city to give to them and give him a place, so that he may dwell among them. Now if the avenger of blood pursues him, they shall not deliver the manslayer into his hand, because he struck his neighbor without premeditation, and did not hate him beforehand. He shall dwell in that city until he stands before the congregation for judgment, and until the death of the one who is high priest in those days. Then the manslayer shall return to his own city, and to his own house, to the city from which he fled.
Wow.
So I think it's very interesting that that guy has to stay in the city until the high priest dies. So he's not free until the death of somebody frees him. That sounds very familiar. Yeah? So to recap all those words that we just read, if a person commits manslaughter, he has to go to one of the 6 cities, which is Kadesh, Shechem, Hebron, Golan, Ramath, and Bezer. Any of those 6 cities he can go to. And then he had to present himself at the gate of the city, where they would determine, if the person should be able to stay or not. They're going to make a case. If he can't stay, he's going to be there at the city until the case is made and until the death of the high priest. If somebody does show up to try to kill him because they want revenge, they cannot give him over. He's under their protection. So he's there until the high priest
They
dies.
have to fight him?
No. Well, because in last couple portions ago, they already set up 3 on, I believe, the east side of the Jordan. And then on this one, they set up the Kadesh, Shechem, and Hebron, if I'm not mistaken. Either that or it's the opposite. But they set up 3 earlier, and then they're setting up 3 more now.
In the Bible, when you look at Judges, I read this story recently in Judges, like verse 6 and 4, and they talk about when there was wars back in Judges, they talk about people going from city to city, and things happening. So the same thing happens over and over, but it gets more sophisticated and more knowing. Like they know more about what they're doing. Like even though they know what they're doing, they still have problems. Nothing's perfect.
Yeah, exactly. But you got to keep trying. So to recap these commandments that we just talked about, how many Levitical cities were there?
Like 6.
Levitical cities.
Oh, it's
48, yeah. Can you name them all?
Hebron.
No, I'm just kidding.
Too many.
How many cities of refuge were there?
48.
We said 6.
6.
Cities of refuge is 6. Levitical cities is 48. Can you name one of them at least? Shechem, Kadesh.
Hebron.
No.
Huh?
Levite?
Rabon? Yeah, Rabon, yes.
Sounds Spanish.
It does sound kind of Spanish. So why were the Levites not allowed to have an inheritance? Yeah, so it wouldn't take away from what their function was, and it wouldn't go to their heads. And then what was the function of the Levitical cities? Actually, you know what? I didn't actually talk about that. I missed that. But there's 48 cities dispersed among the nations of Israel. Each tribe has 4 cities. The purpose of those cities is to have somebody in the tribe to teach the people how to keep the law and how to obey God. That's the function of the Levites. They're supposed to teach people how to keep order from the chaos.
Hey, sometimes I do yoga.
That's off topic. Afterwards, yeah. What was the function of the cities of refuge?
To keep manslaughter.
Yeah, so cases of manslaughter, you'd run to one of those 6 cities, and then you'd be there until the high priest died. And then how long did the manslaughter stay there? I just said it, until the high priest died. So there's an interesting part here in the portion where it talks about a prophet like Moses. So in Deuteronomy 18:15 it says, "The Lord will raise up for you a prophet like me from your brothers. It is to him you shall listen, just as you desired of the Lord your God at Horeb on the day of assembly, when you said, 'Let me not hear again the voice of the Lord my God, or see this great fire anymore, lest I die.' And the Lord said to me, 'They are right in what they have spoken. I will
Raise
up for them a prophet like you from among their brothers, and I will put my mouth in his words, and He shall speak to them all that I commanded him. And whoever will not listen to my words, that he shall speak in my name, I myself will require it of him. But the prophet who presumes to speak a word in my name, that I have not commanded him to speak, or he speaks in the name of another gods, that same prophet shall die. And if you say in your heart, how may we know that the Lord that God, how may we know that the word that the Lord has not spoken? When a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, if his word does not come pass or come true, that is a word that the Lord has not spoken. That prophet has spoken presumptuously. You need not to be afraid of him. So basically, Moses talks about there's going to be a prophet like him, in that sense that Moses was this big, huge guy. He brought the people away from oppression. So there's going to be another type of Moses in the future. And that's what the Jewish people are waiting for. And that's when you read in the book of John 1:19-25, John the Baptist is talking to the Pharisees, and I think also the Sadducees, and they come up to him and they say, this was John's testimony when the Jewish leaders in Jerusalem sent priests and Levites to ask him who he was. He did not fail to confess, but confessed freely, I am not the Messiah. They asked him, then who are you? Are you Elijah? Are you a prophet like Elijah? And he said, I am not. Are you the prophet? And when it means the prophet, it's talking about the prophet like Moses. And he answered, no. And finally they said, who are you? Give us an answer to take back to those who sent us. What do you say about yourself? And then John replied in the words of Isaiah the prophet, I am the voice of one calling the wilderness, make straight the way for the Lord. Well, a lot of people don't actually know that the Jewish people were expecting the prophet like Moses, as it was prophesied in Deuteronomy 18. And then in Acts 3, it makes a connection with Yeshua. It says, but this is how God fulfilled what he had foretold through all the prophets, saying that his Messiah would suffer. Repent then and turn to God so that your sins may be wiped out, that times of refreshing may come from the Lord, and that he may send the Messiah who is appointed for you, even Yeshua. Heaven must receive him until the time comes for God to restore everything as he promised long ago through his holy prophets. For Moses said, the Lord your God will raise up for you like a prophet like me from among your own people. You must listen to everything he tells you. Anyone who does not listen to him will be completely cut off from their people. So Acts 3 makes a connection to Deuteronomy 18. And it's saying that Yeshua is that prophet like Moses. He comes to free us from our bondage.
Why do they talk about Moses coming back even though he's not God? Because Jesus is not God, but he's a piece of God. But it goes back, because people go back and forth about Jesus and God thing. And they don't accept the fact that he did what he did and that's it. Okay.
But you're saying about Moses?
Moses, for some reason, this text, it says that Moses, it sounds like they think Moses is coming back.
Well, they're not expecting Moses exactly, but somebody like a Moses. You know what I mean? And that's what this text is saying that Yeshua is like that Moses coming to free us from our bondage. Mm-hmm. So in that same way, he's going to free us from our sins so that we can have eternal life. Yeah. So there's a couple miscellaneous laws that I thought we should cover. The first one, Mitzvah 5:27, it says, it shall be if the town makes you an answer of peace, they shall serve you. So a lot of people, when they hear about Israel conquering Canaan, they always talk about, well, they went and they slaughtered everybody and they just killed everybody heartlessly. But if you actually read the Bible, you'd be surprised to find out that they would give people an opportunity to join Israel. So they would go to those cities and be like, hey, if you want to join and forget about all the idolatry, you can join us and that's fine. Otherwise, I'm sorry, but, it is what it is.
It went off again.
Yeah, it's fine. And, they already knew about God and they already knew about Israel. If you remember, I think it's in, when they go to Jericho, I think it's in Joshua. They go to Jericho and they go inside and they speak to the prostitute Rahab. And she tells them that we heard about what happened in Egypt. We heard about how you defeated those big kings. We heard how you crossed on dry land. We know that your God is God. So everybody understood that they were screwed because our gods, they're just statues. But yours is living. So they knew about God. So if they knew about God and they knew that he is God, now they have an opportunity to join. They don't have to die. But if they do fight them, then it is what it is. Mitzvah 5:29, it says, you shall not destroy its trees, and you shall not cut them down. So when they would go to war, they were not allowed to take down any trees, fruit trees, anything like that.
Because it's fertility.
No, in this sense, the tree had nothing to do with anything. It's just a tree. Yeah, and why are you going to kill a fruit tree? Why get rid of something that's good for you? You know what I mean?
That's true.
And if you think about it, it's a very different way of thinking than we do today. When we see war, How many times have you guys seen videos or pictures and everything's like totally demolished?
Because
Or-
of nuclear weapons.
Well, yeah, even that too. When we did that to Japan and we totally wiped out a city, it would go against the Torah because God doesn't want you to just totally wipe out and annihilate everybody and everything. That's not what war is supposed to be. For
It should
God,
be about defending.
yeah, for God it's about defense, and then if there's like idolatry and stuff like that, then that gets dealt with. But the earth itself is not supposed to be touched because it's part of the creation. It's important.
Has Hiroshima and Nagasaki ever been restored?
Yeah, they're still. You can go there now and they're fine.
No more nuclear?
Oh yeah, that one I don't have too much information about. That's a good connection. If you guys remember, he stalked to that tree and it didn't have any fruit, and then he cursed the tree. And then there's Mitzvah 530. It says that there would be a slain person found. So basically, they shall break the neck of the heifer. So if this is the case, if you're like in the middle of nowhere and there's a random dead person, they would send out 5 people from the Sanhedrin to figure out why did he die? Was it an accident? Was he killed? And then they would see which was the closest city from that body. And whoever was closest, they would have to sacrifice, or not sacrifice, but offer a heifer to make sure that no blood was on their tribe. If they couldn't figure out who killed him or whatever happened to him, it's just to make sure that no blood is on the tribe's hands. So they would do this. And then wherever they offer the heifer, because they would have to go to that location, wherever they offer the heifer, nothing was supposed to be touching that land. So they couldn't plant anything. They couldn't build a building on it. It was just, because now that heifer was connected to death, and that death was connected to an innocent life. So now nobody's supposed to touch that land. So those were just a couple of laws that I thought were interesting. So to summarize what I talked about, so Israel has 3-level court system, just like we have our Supreme Court. Yeah, what was it? The first one. What was the top one?
Great Sanhedrin.
Great Sanhedrin, and then the next one. The Lesser Sanhedrin. The Great Sanhedrin is going to have 71 judges, and they're going to be in Jerusalem, even though I misspelled that. The Lower Sanhedrin are going to have 23 judges, and they're going to be in towns with greater than 120 people. And then towns with less than 120 are going to have the Beis Din, and they're going to have 3 judges. Now, the 3 judges, I didn't mention this, but they don't have to be priests. They could be, but they could be civilians. In the ancient Near East, it was common to have judges at the gates of the city. Trees were not to be planted near the temple. It was an ancient Near Eastern practice to plant trees in honor of a pagan deity. And back then, specifically in that time, trees were associated with fertility. So that's why God doesn't want any trees in the temple, so that way nobody confuses, oh, they're doing fertility stuff. Israel could have a king, but he had to be chosen by God. He was appointed by the Great Sanhedrin and approved by a prophet. Could not be a foreigner, had to be from the line of David. And the king wasn't allowed to accumulate horses, gold, silver, or wives.
People keep making sounds in the background.
Yes, we'll talk about that. Horses represented a king's war power, and wives were married for political reasons between nations. The thing went off.
It's more comforting me. I like that.
Yeah. Wives represented the political deity of each nation they came from. So when Solomon married all those wives, they were technically idols from those nations. And the Levites, including the Kohanim, they did not have an inheritance in the land, but they had 48 cities that they shared with the tribes. And then there were 6 cities of refuge. The cities were for those who committed manslaughter. You could run to that city and be safe until the high priest died, or if you were not guilty. Otherwise, if you were guilty, they would have to hand you over.